IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat. Hello and welcome to All Things Policy. I'm Manoj Kevalramani, and today I have with me a special guest, Antara Singh from the Delhi Policy Group, a fellow China watcher whose work I've observed for many months now. And she's got a new paper out on Chinese use of India, which is absolutely fascinating, given that it covers this particularly tricky time when the standoff has played out and on the LAC and clashes have taken place in Galwan. So we're going to have an in-depth conversation with Antara about her coverage of China and her view of what the Chinese worldview is, because she's one of the few people in India who's looking at actual Chinese language writing and reportage about the world. So Antara, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Manoj, and I'm really pleased to be here today to talk with you on this fascinating topic that you proposed. So yeah, we can go ahead with it.
All right. So let's begin, Antara, first by looking at Beijing's worldview. So you essentially look at a lot of Chinese language writing, Chinese experts, Chinese analysts writing on platforms across the board. And you sort of, in your work, I can see, so there is a broad sweep of narratives that come across. It's not unitary narrative from China. Mm-hmm. So firstly, I wanted to get your sense of how do you think China's worldview, the leadership's worldview, based on what you've sort of covered, has evolved amid the pandemic. I mean, when the pandemic began, we all thought that this was an existential threat to the party. Right. But now there is the argument that, now there is a pandemic, the party is taking the opportunity to sort of assert its sort of claims across the board along its periphery. So what's the view? Is this an insecure leadership, or is this a confident leadership that it's contained the pandemic?
I think all Chinese policies, there are too much of dilemmas in everything, Like, for example, the pandemic, when it started, they were too kind of apprehensive that how it will affect China's image, what kind of effect it will have on, how other people are thinking about China. But then when it kind of, when the epidemic became a pandemic and all other countries were being affected, then they were like, they were more confident saying, okay, we have done a very good job and we have made hospitals within a week and we have really, stopped the pandemic in a very successful way. So that was there. And then again, this thought came in that probably other countries might see this pandemic as a reason to relocate their industries from China, or China might be cut off from the global supply chain. So, it's you cannot say that, okay, China is confident or it is underconfident. It is always, too many thoughts probably, playing at the same time. It is always a dilemma kind of a situation that I see China to be in.
So fascinating. So basically you're saying, if I'm going to use Xi Jinping's language, you're saying there is a constant contradiction that he has to deal with.
Yes, a constant contradiction. I mean, in fact, the identity of China is a matter of contradiction to the people within China. Like, is it a developing country? Is it a developed country? What is the position of China? What is the place of China in the world? That is being constantly debated. And it is not something they have come to a conclusion about what is exactly the position of China or the status of China. So they are constantly debating it. And it's kind of a flux, in flux probably. So yeah, that is how they are seeing things.
So Antara, yes, I agree with you. There is a bit of a contradiction in how, and there's a constant discussion within China about how they perceive themselves and their place in the world. But from the point of view of sort of your observation of how is the leadership looking at the world, does it see increased? I mean, we constantly read about, Xi Jinping's comments where he talks about this is an unprecedented phase in world history.
Right.
in sort of the past 100 years and so on and so forth. Does he see more threats for China right now, or is there more opportunities?
See, the thing is, there are threats and opportunities. Threats in the form of, supply chain moving out of China. That is one of the biggest threats probably that they feel right now. And they think that people are, countries are conspiring against it and trying to, cut it off from the global supply chains. So that is one of the biggest concerns that I see among all the Chinese scholars and strategists. And among opportunity, of course, they are talking about digitizations, and they're talking about 5G, they're talking about technological progress, industrial revolution 4.0, and so opportunities in that way, and threat in probably if China is cut off from the rest of the world. So this is how they're that is how they're seeing the development.
Okay, so the primary threat is about being cut off from global supply chains and sort of being pressured by probably the US and the West in that context. And there are also opportunities, like you highlighted, particularly in the technological domain, and sort of moving up the value chain in the industrialization process. Okay, let's now move to India. And let's look at how India sort of fits into the Chinese worldview. So the conventional wisdom sort of on all of this tells us that, look, China's big fight, at least right now, and for the longest time, has been with the United States. Its primary threat emanates from its eastern borders, from the seas. And yes, there is a challenge with India on the west, but it's not something that's as massive from a Chinese point of view. And also South Asia historically has not been a priority sector for the Chinese. That doesn't mean that they haven't been engaged in the region, but it's not been a priority sector. But that's changed with BRI. So I want to sort of get your sense on, when you've been reading about what the Chinese are talking about. Firstly, how does the government view India? How does the leadership view India and South Asia? What is their view of the relationship between President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Modi, given that they've had these two informal summits and now things are at an all-time low since 1962?
So, you're right, probably. This China's engagement with South Asia came in different phases, and for a very long time, South Asia didn't figure very high in their priority list. But things began to change probably with President Xi Jinping coming to power in around, say, 2013 or 2014, during that time, when they came to India. Li Keqiang came to India. He made India a part of his maiden foreign visit. From that time, they have been trying to improve relationship with India. They came up after that. They came up with the Belt and Road Initiative, and there were some efforts from Chinese side during that time to get closer to India, or to have a better relationship with India. But eventually things played out in a way which didn't really kind of it didn't come up as was expected, and things began to backfire, or if I say backfire, I don't know. But then things began to take a dip, probably with the border incursions or the border incidents that happened since 2013. 2014, there was one border incident. Then there were, continuous border incursions and incidents happening. Then after Doklam, the perception changed about India, and they kind of started talking about India being the most the biggest threat in the secondary direction. So if you see how China sees the Chinese worldview, they see, of course, as you mentioned, the United States and Japan. United States and its allies in the East as the primary strategic direction, and India as the main opponent in the secondary direction. And after that, the last summit that we had, if you followed the Chinese narrative after the last summit, you could see that there was a lot of disappointment within the Chinese strategic community. And their understanding was that India-China relationship is not going anywhere. It is, I mean, there isn't much prospect in China-India relationship, and the only thing that could be done is just maintain peace, the basic peace and stability in the secondary direction. And I mean, they thought that they were having too much of expectations out of India, and I mean, it was not coming out as was expected. So after Doklam, their perception towards India changed quite a lot, and there was this kind of disappointment over there. And somehow, it culminated with what happened in last month with the Galwan incident.
This is interesting, right? So you're saying that after Doklam, there was a sense of disappointment, and there was an attempt at readjustment, of course, because we saw the informal summits.
Yeah.
But particularly after October last year, when we had the summit in Mamlapuram, there was a sense of disappointment that, look, we are essentially in a holding format where we're trying to maintain peace as opposed to actually improving the relationship.
Yeah.
And that's sort of been management more than sort of actually deepening anything has been the real sort of way both sides have approached it. If I get that right.
So their expectations were, not met. I mean, the way they approached India in, say, since 2013-14, the expectations that they had were not met, and they were somehow disillusioned with India, and they were kind of totally disappointed that there is no future, or there is no nothing. I mean, no good thing can happen in this relationship. That's what the conclusion that they drew, probably. And that is one section of the strategic community. That's what I'm talking about. Not everybody.
Yeah, which is interesting, right? Because it's exactly after 2014 that we also see investments from China into India grow. I mean, the much touted figure right now of tech investments of being at about $8 billion. And there are sort of other, Anand Krishnan has a paper which talks about committed and already invested amounts estimated at about $26 billion over a period of time from 2014 onwards, sort of a qualitative shift. So there was an effort made at sort of at least, tapping into the market. Yet at a strategic level, you're saying that a part of the strategic community was disappointed. And it's sort of similar in India, right? I mean, a part of the strategic community in India was very disappointed with things like NSG, Masood Azhar, and so on and so forth.
Right.
So both sides had a sense that they were not sort of doing what they could, and they were both in a holding pattern.
Right.
This sort of gets me to the paper that you've done, and I want to mention the title of the paper, and we'll link it in the show notes. It's called China-India Border Standoff, China's India Dilemma. And in this, you look at two different groups of the strategic community and how they sort of view India. And what sort of stood out to me in the paper was that there is really no group which looks at the relationship positively in terms of, this could be a friendly relationship. Both groups have a sense that this is going to be a problematic relationship. But I want you to first talk to us about the sort of hardliners, right, who you talk about, who sort of had the sense that it was India's provocations that were responsible for the current problems. And this was sort of a structural issue and this was inevitable. Talk to us about a little bit about how they view India, particularly in the context of this current standoff.
Okay, so there is this, what I read is there is this policy of 3 no's, like no weakness, no concession, and no defensive defense. So it is China should take all opportunities to kind of crack down on India, to take the initiative to hit it hard wherever possible. So, and their argument is that this is not going to damage the relationship. This is going to make it stable. And they refer to the 1962 border war. They refer, and they say that didn't that help to maintain peace and stability on the Western Front for next 50 years? And didn't it eliminate the US and the Soviet ambitions to use India to contain China? So this is one part of the argument. And then these people, their plan of action is probably threefold. One is to keep India under control by destabilizing the entire border region from the McMahon line in the east to the Aksai Chin in the west. And second is, of course, to take the initiative to attack and seize territories under India's control in Kashmir, in Arunachal. And then third is probably to weaken India internally by supporting the cause of separatists, probably the Maoists and Naga separatists and the Kashmiris. So these are the three plan of action, probably what they are discussing right now.
That's fascinating, right? And they also sort of talk about, like you said, what really sort of intrigued me is because when we talk about capabilities and sort of everyone refers to the difference of India and China in terms of the asymmetry of the economy and also sort of military asymmetry.
Right.
But obviously, when we talk of that, we need to keep in mind that China needs a significant amount of forces direction towards the east. Yet these guys sort of talk about, can we prepare for a two-front war, and sort of taking cue from Indian planners who talk about the two-front war. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, as I told you, there is the main dilemma is should China put the strategic focus on its eastern side, or it sort out the western side first and then focus on the eastern side. So that is the main dilemma. And, if you look at the analysis on the Doklam incident, you will see that they talk about this overconfidence that China had, that its the power gap that exists between China and India will prevent India from doing anything which kind of like trampling China's red line.
Yeah.
And the underconfidence that China had about having a two-front situation. So that is the dilemma that they have. So should they focus on the eastern side, or should they focus on the western side? Can they focus on both the sides simultaneously? That is they are not very sure about it.
Yeah. And the other sort of set of people that you sort of talk about in the paper, I mean, I sort of refer to them as the more pragmatic people. I'm going to quote a little bit from the paper. You say that these are strategists holding this perspective, criticize those vying for quote unquote teaching India a lesson. Mm-hmm. They call it being short-sighted. And they sort of accuse them for not psychologically being prepared for the rise of India. I wanted to get your sense of, like I said, none of these people are looking at the sort of Hindi-Chini bhai-bhai relationship, but they are saying, look, we need to have a much more pragmatic approach. What are the interests that they seek to preserve by having this sort of, preparing for India's rise and being sort of acknowledging it? What are the interests that they want to preserve?
Well, as I mentioned in the paper, they see threats in the sense if India-China relationship it just breaks down somewhere, then probably India will keep harming China's interest in many ways. So one is about China's access to the Indian Ocean. China has to pass through either Myanmar or through Pakistan to reach the Indian Ocean. So India will try everything possible to probably prevent it to reach the Indian Ocean, and its lines of communication will be threatened in the process. And one thing is that. Another thing is about the anti-China alliance that is growing in the world, and it believes that India might join the group, and it will collaborate with these powers to relocate industries from China, or to the international organizations. They will like to reform the international organizations in a way that China is sidelined. So it's basically the isolation of China. India will take part in the group and isolate China from the global system. So that is one of the worries that they have. Okay, so the two primary worries that they have in this context are the Indian Ocean region and access to it, and the challenges that will come if you alienate India. And the second is also the threat that India could sort of join a balancing coalition of some sorts, much more aggressively than what they probably presume we are right now doing so. Right.
The third sort of interesting point in your sort of assessment was about how a deterioration of India-China relationship sort of impacts China's efforts to work with Russia with regards to the US. What have you read in that context?
So it is basically their point of view is that if there is a war sort of a situation that breaks out in this direction, then China will be prevented from forging closer ties with Russia, because India also has, good relations with Russia, and Russia is one of the biggest suppliers of weapons and munitions to India. And if there is a war kind of a situation, probably it will be difficult for China to forge an alliance with Russia in the direction of United States and its allies. So that is one of the concerns that were brought out, and that is what they mentioned in their analysis of the incident.
All right. So lastly, we've spoken about what the leadership's view is. We've spoken, in your sense, we've spoken about what the sort of analysts are thinking in the strategic community. Let's look at just finally the broad sort of social media terrain. What was the sort of social media conversation through the last month and a half? I mean, there were periods where the hashtag on the India-China border standoff trended quite high. And there was a period where it was even censored.
Right.
And from my tracking, I saw lots of fake news and lots of sort of old videos. I mean, I remember the 2017 video of a border security force officer complaining about lack of food on the Western Front in India. And that being shared on social media in Weibo and all of that. What's the sort of social media commentary been in the last sort of month and a half about India?
See, I saw a lot of disappointment among Chinese people about China not coming clean about how many people, I mean, what is the number of the casualties on their side, and what exactly happened on June 15th. And I saw a lot of Chinese strategists talking about, being very critical about the government, that they handled the situation in a low key way, and India was kind of getting all the sympathies from other countries and condolences from other countries, and China was being portrayed as an aggressor. So they were critical of that, and a lot of people were they got to know about the Chinese casualties from Indian media. So they were disappointed about that, and they wanted the Chinese government to come clean on the casualty part. But that did not happen. But, when all these kind of discussions were happening, then we saw the Chinese foreign ministry coming up with the step-by-step account of what happened. So that is the most they did after all those discussions. But of course, the casualty figures were never confirmed by the Chinese side. So that is quite a disappointment for, I think, a lot of Chinese youth. And I saw people talking about, the Indian Prime Minister visited the border area, and, they are openly talking about what happened and why did not that happen from the Chinese side, and why is not Chinese leadership talking about what is happening in the Western Front, and why is it important to probably get into a military, this kind of a deterioration of relationship with India. What is the reason behind it? So I think there is a lot of interest among people in China to know what is happening, and to know the Chinese leadership's opinion about what is happening in the Western Front, and why is it important now to probably engage with India militarily.
All right, that's fascinating. Right? That's fascinating that this is actually a conversation, and particularly given censorship and everything, that it's actually Indian media reportage which actually got through to Weibo and sparked this conversation. My final question to you is, looking ahead, given all the stresses that have happened over the past month, we're talking about some sort of a disengagement right now. Again, things are very unclear. And then subsequently a de-escalation. How do you see, what is your sense right now? And this is a bit of crystal ball gazing. How do you see this relationship going forward? Are there sort of structurally things that can be done to maintain stability, or do you anticipate much more volatility going down the road?
I think it's going to be volatile, but of course efforts will be made from both the direction to stabilize the situation, but right now it's too premature probably to guess how it will evolve, because right now, in India probably the sentiment has been hurt quite bad by what happened at the Galwan Valley, and in China I think they are totally in two minds what to do with India. And this is, it's in a state of flux. Nobody knows how things will kind of evolve from here. So I think anything is possible at this point in time.
All right. So on that note, we are going to end this conversation. Thank you so much, Antara. This has been a fascinating conversation. Like I said, I'm going to link the paper in the show notes, and I would advise and recommend everybody to read it. And folks, do follow the China Monitor that she works on. It's excellent stuff.
Thank you so much, Manoj. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
I hope you enjoyed that show. I'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Paytm Money and Intel. It's been a really, really cool week on the network. We've had Ashwin Sanghi on Cyrus Says. We have Masaba Gupta on Advertising is Dead. You should definitely check out Vivek Lath, who shared up on Storytellers and Story Sellers. A close friend and partner of ours, Karthik Paricha, was on the Pragati podcast talking about the future of podcasting, which I think is really, really interesting. And I would like to ask people to check out All Things Policy and what they've been doing. They've been having some really interesting discussions about India's challenging relationship with China as we go forward, and I think that would be a great thing for you guys to check out. So with that, we hope to see you again next week.
Hi, my name is Anupam Gupta. I'm B50 on Twitter. I am the host of Paisa Vaisa, the show that talks money. On my show, I speak to experts from every field of money and finance, from stock markets, equities, debt funds, credit cards, life insurance, every possible area of money and finance that you can think of. We even did an episode on cryptocurrency. I've got fantastic guests from mutual funds to personal finance experts everywhere. Robo-advisory, startups, just name it, we've got it. At Paisa Vaisa, we help you make smart decisions about money. You work hard for money. Now make your money work hard for you. New episodes out every Monday, and you can listen to my show on the IVM Podcast app or any other podcasting app that you have.